Ms. Fung, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to hearing your understanding of the barriers to adopting IoT and the recommendations for us to take into consideration as we advance our work in support of the report to be delivered to Congress this winter. I will pass the mic on to you, Ms. Fung. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you all for having me, but I think one of the big things I want to talk about is that how can we have Internet of Things that is of the people, by the people, and for the people? And I think what we're advocating here is a way in which people can be involved, not just in the use of it, but actually in the in adapting it so that it makes sure that we can flourish as humans and we can steward the planet. So the presentation is really about what are the current barriers to doing that today. The first three barriers that I'd like to bring up for three barriers to global IoT adoption is security and privacy. There's no assurance of responsibility by the makers or the operators right now. That's number one. Number two is identity. Specific devices have no unique identity that's trackable through each device's life cycle, including disposal. And then the last one is the lack of standards, which of course is an issue that I really want NIST to help solve. Expensive custom devices inhibit, number one, widespread use, and B, increasing functionality. Because if we had interoperable standards, more manufacturers, more designers could have digital building blocks that fit together. No one has to do the whole thing from soup to nuts. So lack of standards is increasing upfront and operating costs, as well as decreasing reliability and functionality. What I want to go into today is how we can address some of these things. And the acronym that I have come up with is LLII, License, Label, Identity, and Interoperability. Barbara, how are you doing on getting the slides? I think it just would be actually much easier if I had the slides to talk to. Okay, I'll just keep going. So I've been part of the IEEE Standards Association's major Planet Positive initiative. Planet Positive is about having green, resilient technology development. And I've been a main author of the Planet Positive report's first chapter on guiding principles. In that chapter, the part that we really focused on was a responsible tech checklist. And this responsible tech checklist can help with the labeling that we want to do. I'm going to read the checklist. Number one, centered on the person or people. 2, respectful of the natural environment and stewardship of the planet. 3, sustainable by design. 4, preserves desired privacy and security by design. 5, protects personal information with timely, specific, informed consent on the private or public use of data. Next, accountable to the people who use it and to the planet. Accountable in addition to those who fund and manage it. Next one, ethical by the IEEE Code of Ethics. Deployed in solutions that are appropriate to the context of the problem. And deployed where a human is in the loop with respect to overseeing and managing technological systems. And finally, developed with due respect for justice, fairness, the law, and public interest. I have a really good slide here, which I don't know if Barbara has yet. So apparently not. So I will talk to the slide. The slide shows a cycle. There's 4 components of this cycle, and here are what they are. The first component is that people consume technology 24/7, and it affects our health and lives. Now, in an earlier era, we consumed food and drugs, and it affected our health and lives. And we began to have nutrition labels, and we had drug labels. So this is why we need to start to do licensing and labeling, because the effect on our health and lives. The next part of the cycle is that we should keep improving the design, development, use, and disposal of technology in an iterative, cyclic, dynamic process. We can't do it one off and then, oh, find the problem and then come back and relook at the whole thing. No, it has to be continuous improvement. The third part of the cycle is feedback. We have to get feedback by the people who design it, by the developers, by public interest advocates, and citizens who are using it, so we can identify the harms and respond to them quickly, and identify the unforeseen consequences, which can maybe detected later only by researchers. That's the third part of the cycle. The last part of the cycle is a proposal for adaptive Internet of Things licensing and labeling, which allows for evolving, appropriate, timely response at each stage of each Internet of Things device life cycle. And what's in the middle of this cycle is voice-enabled conversational AI. But we need to get this feedback as quickly as possible from the people who are seeing it and wanting to give that feedback. They don't want to wait for a survey. They want to be able to say, here's what's going on, here's what I see. We can apply conversational AI to pick this up as soon as we get that feedback, and use machine learning and AI to help get us where we need to be much quicker. So we call this licensing and labeling at internet speed and scale. The licensing and labeling for the Internet of Things, this is our recommendation, is that we should learn from drug and nutrition labeling. And that labeling recognized the need to alert people about how they are affected by what they consume. We are consuming technology today. We need to do labeling. Licensing can also allow for appropriate and timely response, both to the negative impacts, the unforeseen consequences, but also the positive impacts. When things work, we want them to spread, and we want people to have confidence that what they are using or buying can in fact do what it's supposed to. And we cannot expect that the advanced technologies and innovations that we're spending time on, and with the current, U.S. industrial policy, the first green resilient policy, we will not generate the beneficial outcomes automatically. Technology is only as good as we are, and licensing and labeling Internet of Things devices requires human intervention, and quick human intervention, not wait for the backlash, then do the regulations, but have dynamic systems which allow us to respond. So it's up to us, those of us who are technologists, to decide how technology is designed and developed, and whether we believe that our technologies are being built to work and serve in the best interests of humanity. And I just want to say bravo to the labeling by the US Cyber Trust Mark, which was just announced this week by the White House and the FCC. which includes participation from the major retailers, including Amazon, Best Buy, Google, Logitech, and Samsung. And this Shield logo label signals to consumers that they have agreed to the NIST standards. I want to point out that we actually should be looking at more. We are making a recommendation, the people-centered internet, that we need to have a participation and feedback process associated with the US Cyber Trust Mark and build in iterative improvement. Because we can, because the technology exists, it's a question of the will, the institutional will to put in place these pieces. I am, as a member of the Planet Positive group of the IEEE, I specifically advocated responsible use of technology and technology labeling as one of the guiding principles for Planet Positive. It's guiding principle number 9. And I just want to actually let you know what that guiding principle is, and it's in the presentation, which you all will get eventually. And this is where hundreds of people have come together to create Planet Positive report over the last 2 years. It's been an IEEE initiative by the Standards Association. What this guiding principle for responsible use of technology and the labeling, technology labeling, is to get and track feedback throughout the life cycle of a device at clear checkpoints, to track and measure deployment of technology at the innovation and experimentation stage, to implement a standardized feedback process for innovation with checkpoints to catch dangerous or irreconcilable issues, to monitor unforeseen consequences, to adopt responsible technology labels like the Cybermark Trust for robustly tested technology so buyers can be informed. We can have different maturity levels. We don't have to expect us to have 100% responsibility, but if people are being more responsible, we want to recognize that additional effort. Buyers need to be informed, and we have to have certification of responsible technology that's in use. You know, who is it in use for what purpose, so that users know what device is qualified to be used for. We do this for drugs. We need to do this for Internet of Things devices. And finally, certification of responsible disposal of the technology when end of life is reached. These are the recommendations from the Positive Planet report. But the recommendation that I want to make personally is to bring the marketplace in by inviting insurance companies to participate in standards development, licensing and labeling, design and definition, and in the approach to identity and interoperability, because in this way, by involving the insurance companies along the way, we can have more affordable insurance for Internet of Things, which then allows the market to expand and more people to be confident that they will be taken care of. The next one is about identity. So the slides have the different phases of the life cycle of an Internet of Things device. And we should have identity which points out the phase that you are in. You can first, at the design phase, identify the need, imagine the solution, design and test, and then have user testing. And that's an iterative cycle. And there might be different versions of the Internet of Things device as those iterations go through. We would need unique identities for those devices as they're going through that. And then you have the manufacturer. There is an identity called a manufacturer usage description, or MUD, which is one of the Internet RFC proposals. So in the slide set, I've got the links to the RFC proposal for MUD. And having this kind of manufacturer ID would allow us to track the identity, but we are proposing the people-centered internet that we do it before manufacturing and we do it after, as we need to license identity in each field use of an IoT device, which could be in multiple networks over time and with multiple responsible owners. By creating identity fields which allow for this diverse, multi-layered use of Internet of Things devices, we can more uniquely identify what's going on where and who's responsible. Finally, end of life and disposal. All identity should go all the way through, from identifying the need all the way to the disposal of the device. And it's an iterative cycle. My final recommendation is interoperability for Internet of Things. There's a massive commercial win for NIST that could drive US global digital leadership. Internet of Things, as we all are aware, could deliver tremendous benefits. But some of the issues that we've raised here, the barriers to adoption, are stopping it. But the one that is really the commercial barrier is interoperability. There are many new entrants, but we need interoperability to increase functionality and drive down costs. One of the members of our people-centered internet community is Robert C. He's with USDA and he's here in California. When I told him I was coming to talk with you all, he said, IoT can be adopted to the full range of farm types and sizes, products, climates, and constraints. California, the home of Silicon Valley, the IoT that's developed and used and tested in California has global use cases. In California alone, there are more than 400 types of crops with a full range of terrain, climate zones that match what's going on in many parts of the world. In California, water is a major issue. Interoperability for IoT developed in California for helping to grow crops in California can have huge potential for increasing the world's food supply and reliability. So finally, the wrap up. The 3 barriers to global IoT adoption. So we said security and privacy, no assurance of responsibility by the maker. Our recommendation is label and license with a responsible tech checklist and uniquely identified IoT licensed devices. The second barrier is unique identity trackable through life cycle. The recommendation, let's do it. The third barrier is lack of standards in interoperability. So this inhibits widespread use and makes it expensive to increase functionality. So we are proposing interoperability. In fact, thinking about how the internet itself became so widespread, there was a clearinghouse event called Interop, and we could have Interop for IoT to get internet speed and scale. So the first question I asked was, can the Internet of Things be of the people, by the people, and for the people? And the answer is a resounding yes. By licensing IoT, by labeling IoT, by providing identity for IoT over the life cycle of the device, and by having interoperability for a massive commercial win for generations. But we have to be able to assure that we put the guardrails in place with licensing, labeling, and identity. I have a final recommendation. The people-centered internet community rallied together to create this presentation for you. We have the expertise and willingness to deliver on these recommendations. One of our members wrote, "We need to create a people-centered Internet of Things that focuses the technology to be helpful, honest, and harmless. It is likely in the next 20 years, we will have trillions of intelligent IoT achieving complex goals. We, the people, need to ensure these goals are aligned with humanity's goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and thereafter." Thank you, Doug Cahulant, for saying it so well. And I provided an appendix, 5 pages of input from our PCI community, which includes the first contribution by Vince Cerf, our founding chair, about an IoT ecosystem, and then references on the labels and identity proposals that I have given. So, very good. I see now that we've got the application. Any
Mei Lin,
questions?
yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that very enlightening presentation. Not only a look back, but to the present and obviously to the future. My apologies to everyone for having to transition planes, trains, and automobiles, but interoperability standards and labeling, those are the key recommendations, Mei Lin, I took away from your talk, and those are absolutely the top 3 recommendations that we are also, as an advisory board, putting forth in front of Congress. So really appreciate your further confirming those recommendations that we all have been discussing and noodling over for the past several months together. And thank you again to you and Vince Cerf for the, I guess, the creation and the genesis and the catalyst of something called the internet that has enabled us to actually gather here today and where we are with the IoT Advisory Committee. So thank you so much. I'll open it up. I don't know, Benson, how we're doing on time, but happy to take a question perhaps from anyone on the board. Thank you.
I think Mike has a question.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. And I am pleased to report a couple of things regarding the US Cyber Trust Mark that was launched yesterday. It's based on NIST requirements, and there's a couple elements in your presentation that I want to highlight in this whole process for the US Cyber Trust Mark. In terms of iteration, as NIST and industry update the requirements, we will iterate ourselves into greater levels of security. That's an element of this. It's not often stressed, and there isn't a timeline, but the functionality is available so that as we continue to grow our capability and bring down cost on certain elements, we can start integrating it into the minimum requirements for the program. The second thing I wanted to mention is the label already has a device identification component in it. So each individual device has to be identified in some way. There may not be the sense of a globally unique identifier that you may be looking for, in the sense that being able to pick up a device and recognize this single unit is unique on the planet because of this identifier. It's more a goal of identifying that the device on the internet or on the network. but a lot of what you're looking for is actually underway through the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. And I think the missing link might be pieces in privacy, because the Cyber Trust Mark is more about privacy. And there's a separate discussion about that here on the IoT AB. Thank you.
Wonderful. I have to say that Anne gave me no hints. That I independently came up with this, and I think she was just pleased to see it. uh, I would like to just refer Michael to the iterative. I think we need agile adaptation, and I would like to strongly propose that the use of conversational AI, not just for the citizen feedback, but actually amongst the designers and the regulators and the legal, this can speed things up, especially when danger is involved. But it can also speed up the production of very useful things so that more people can flourish. I think there's another person, Tomcat.
Hi, Mei Lin. Thank you so much for your presentation. The two L's and the two I's stand out. Labeling, licensing, identity, interoperability. The key thing is that all of those are intertwined. You cannot look at them in isolation, obviously. But my question and or potential follow-up is in your comment about identity being evolving. If you have a device identity or identifiers, Mike basically specified it, which is a network IP address. If you're going to actually do an software update on it, it has a new identity because somebody intervened and got something to it. So in the life cycle of the devices, there may be all these workflow operations that may occur on it that change the identity. It's like when you go to school, you get your first degree, your third degree, your fourth degree, you get a driver's license, your identity evolves, as you pointed out, right? The question really is, how do we track all that? This is essential for security, resilience, and whatever. We are actually proposing the concept of digitalization with identifiers, the collection of which form an identity. That's one approach, but and you may have an answer to this, but my question is, please give us a quick answer. And two, if you have use case examples, please submit them because we care a lot about how to do this.
Yeah, I actually think timestamp is a really natural that you actually take chronological time. And so you can go right all the way back to, when was this created and when did the time start for this device? That would give you that unique identifier. Normally time doesn't go backwards, so you kind of have it. And then one thought that I had was a kind of a QR code or registry for devices so that the QR code could point to the registry and you'd know where it was in its life cycle based on the timestamp. Those are just some quick responses. I'm just really delighted about the overlap in thinking between all of us. It's fantastic. If nobody else has a question,
I can have one question for you.
No. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, please, Maria. Is it Benson?
No, Benson. So, it's very interesting that some of the things you talked about, one of the things that when I'm not doing this, I'm doing smart cities. And in fact, I think one of our projects is near you, right? I think you're based out in Palo Alto. We're doing some project work in North Fair Oaks, right, just up the road on Middlefield Road. One of the things that we see when people talk about the smart cities, and it's always our belief that a lot of this stuff is not really usable, right? It's by people in the community. They kind of expect a certain level of technical sophistication or digital literacy. But in a city, especially like in an area like North Fair Oaks, which is underserved, a lot of people, they either don't have computers at home or, or their phone is their main way of communicating. And a lot of the things are not designed for people that, that maybe, well, I guess in a smart city, you have all types of people, all different types of literacy levels, And so when we look at some of those things, a lot of those applications aren't really that usable, despite that it has value, right? And so I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that. Should we be thinking more about that in general, not just for smart cities? It's just one application.
I think smart cities brings it up a lot. That's actually why I took the trouble to bring up the concept of conversational AI, voice enabled. If we stick to our current technology and we don't use voice enabled conversational AI, we really leave out 40% of the world. And that's really a big problem for global IoT adoption. So we can now, with voice-enabled conversational AI, actually get a ton of stuff done with a normal dumb phone. It doesn't even have to be smart. So we can get this interchange between people and the cloud in such a way that we could get information. This is a fantastic thing for ESG reporting, which is right now many companies are supposed to, what's the impact? What's your social impact? And they're having a heck of a time getting it. But if you actually do voice-enabled conversational AI, you can get the impact. This is why we came to it. People said to me, Mei Lin, people-centered internet, how do you tell if something is people-centered? And if you stop and think, there's only one way. Ask the people. And so we really came to conversational AI because how do we know it's people-centered? If we really want it to be of the people, by the people, and for the people, we have to ask the people. So I'd love to, Benson, follow up since you're in the area. We can talk more.
Okay, yeah. I mean, happy to discuss. We can show you the project area and what we're going through as well.
Great.
Maria has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Mei Lin. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really great and interesting, and really aligns with a lot of the concepts we've been talking about here in the board. I had a question for you about where you see any gaps between what you're thinking of about labeling and what the new cyber trust mark has, if you know yet what kind of gaps there are. I think Mike addressed some of them, for example, the privacy area, but are there any other areas of gaps there that you think should be addressed in labeling?
I'm going to reinforce this because I said it earlier, but I want to make sure that you are really hearing it. It has to be a dynamic process. We have to respond quickly. And by designing a dynamic process where we could get input right away, we can respond right away. Video game makers do not do waterfall. Video game makers cannot do waterfall because they have to respond to whether the game is exciting. And as people are working with it, they rewrite the game, they change the scenarios, they do the things. The video game people know how to do this dynamic response, and we should bring them in to help us design the cyber trust mark so that it can be as responsive as a video game. Maybe it won't be exactly, but it needs to go a lot further towards it than a waterfall approach.
But how does that look, though? Actually, what's a case where that, like, what's a scenario that would happen? Like, how would you see that?
I would like to ask you to give me time to think about it because I think it's a worthy question and I don't want to come up with an off-the-cuff answer.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Debbie. Thank you, Mei Lin, for your wonderful presentation and for touching on so many things that we're actively talking about and writing about in our report. So thank you for that. Two things that you brought up that I want your thoughts on. One, I think is very important. I like the fact that you came up with the idea of getting more iterative voice feedback, because even when we're talking about like the trust mark and the QR code, every time I hear QR code, I just think about the fact that not everyone has a smartphone. So
Yeah.
whatever solution we come up with, we have to think about that as well, because it has to be accessible to everyone. So how can we do that, especially as a IoT device is not just like a regular toaster that you plug in that doesn't change, right? So when it's updated, things are changing, right? It's moving, it's going to different places. The capabilities are changing, right? So being able to have a process where that stuff gets updated, where anyone, whether it's someone who's 8 years old or 80, can find out that information, whether they have a smartphone or not. I think it's really important. Also, two things you brought up in your recommendation. One was about uh, standards, and the other was about interoperability. And we talk a lot about that. And I think earlier in the conversation, I think before you joined, I think someone, maybe it was Mike, said something. I think he was talking about more just the physical devices, but talking about interoperability and standards, but I think that their interoperability and standards are different. Right, because standards, they're just different. I don't know
Yes,
the best
I
way.
agree.
Just to
I
clarify,
completely agree.
just to clarify, a standard doesn't ensure interoperability. Interoperability is the goal, and you should focus on asking for interoperability. Don't ask for standards. You'll get standards all day without getting interoperability. Standards are
Right.
necessary for interoperability. You have to have standards, but you don't get interoperability just because you have standards. So that's why I'm suggesting this board broadly and anyone else who's looking for interoperability, ask for interoperability. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah, but I still think I agree with what you're talking about. But when I'm the part that I'm working on is privacy, and a lot of times there is no interoperable component there. So we have to make sure we're covering that in some way. So I don't think interoperability really captures that, even though I understand your point. And it may cover some of what we're talking about in the group, but it doesn't really fit in with the privacy part that I'm working on.
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to show slide 5, just because it was one that shows this sort of cycle. And Barbara, I don't know if you could show slide 5. It was one that I really missed not having. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So the idea here is that privacy fits in this. Okay. People can say, oh, it was hard to establish my identity, or my privacy was violated in some way. So we get the feedback in the bottom right-hand side, and then you actually move to, okay, what do we need to change? And so by labeling those people who aren't giving the privacy that people want, well, their label has to say it isn't that private. So I see that if you have this feedback process, that you get what you're talking about. So let's go back to interoperability. I want to tell the story of the internet and interop. They had this big problem, right? All the hardware and the software had to communicate to make the internet work. And it's a wonderful human story that enabled that to happen. It was the Irishman's solution. Irishman. He said, let's all go to San Jose for a week every year and drink beer. And then we'll bring all the hardware and bring all the software. And that meant the hardware people didn't have to buy all the software. The software people didn't have to buy all the hardware. They set up just T1 lines all over the place and then had a fabulous time. The chief architects and the top people, it was a don't miss event. We need to structure social engineering, make interoperability fun, to make it a don't miss event, because the people who did the internet thought about that. And then you can have like privacy plays. Okay, let's try and test to violate privacy. This is all the kind, let's make it fun.
Thank you very much.
Anne?
That was so well said, Mei Lin. Thank you so much. That is probably a great way to end your presentation for now with the advisory board. Thank you so much for enlightening us, further reaffirming the recommendations that we are putting forth to the Secretary and to Congress. And may the force be with us for another 50 more years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is delightful. Thanks for inviting me.